The rise of big business began after the Civil War. Before the Civil War, legislation was passed enabling businesses to form corporations without a professional charter from the United States government. The corporations formed during this time dominated the private and financial sectors in the following years. The era of big business started when entrepreneurs began to develop their small businesses into massive corporations by using mergers and collusion to force out competition and gain a monopoly in that market. The monopoly, control of production and distribution of any product by one firm or by the collusion of multiple firms of a market, allowed the corporation to set any price it wanted for a given substance it monopolized. The corporations who owned monopolies in an industry became very wealthy and powerful, along with their management. Some of the most powerful corporations were John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie's Carnegie Steel, Cornelius Vanderbilt's New York Central Railroad System, J. Piermont Morgan's J.P. Morgan & Co., and Henry Ford's Ford Motor Company. These businessmen heavily controlled all features of their respective industries. An example of how much power they had is shown primarily in John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. By the year 1878, Standard Oil owned 90% of all the country's oil refining capacity. Some of the populace at that time regarded Rockefeller and those like him as robber barons, a ruthless U.S. capitalist who has become wealthy by exploiting others or by corrupting legislatures. Although this name is fitting for those such as Jay Gould, who bribed officials and sold fraudulent stock to build his railroad company, the name is more fitting for those like Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie is Captain of Industry, which is a U.S. capitalist who means of amassing personal fortune contributed positively to the country in some way. Both of them, at the end of their lives, were heavily engaged in philanthropy, the desire to promote the welfare of others, especially with generous donations. Unlike most of the people of that time who engaged in conspicuous consumption, the term was endorsed by a Norwegian-American economist named Thorstein Venbel. The term is used to describe those who buy expensive items to display wealth rather than to cover their needs. In the final years of Andrew Carnegie's and John D. Rockefeller's lives, they gave most of their wealth back to the country that made them. After Andrew Carnegie sold his operation to the U.S. Steel Corporation, headed by Cornelius Vanderbilt, he devoted most of his life and his $480 billion to philanthropy. He funded libraries at first, but then expanded his endeavors in the 20th century. All in all, he donated $10 billion to the New York Public Library, and he established Carnegie Mellon University in 1908. He gave numerous donations to the Carnegie Endowment for National Peace as well. Rockefeller followed suit by establishing both the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University. He was also a strong advocate for sobriety, and he was a deep-rooted Christian, and by the end of his life had given away about $1 trillion. An example of conspicuous consumption is the Baltimore House. It is a 180,000 square foot home with 8,000 acres of land. To give you a better perspective, WCA is 60 acres. It was built by the youngest grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt during the height of the Gilded Age, between 1889 and 1895. The young baron who built the estate was G.W. Vanderbilt. He was so taken by the scenery of Asheville, North Carolina, that he decided to construct a lavish summer home on it. Finally, in the early years of industrialization, the United States had a hands-off attitude toward the business aspects of the country at that time. This is because the government was lenient towards the attitudes and principles of laissez-faire capitalism, which emphasizes the doctrine that the interference of government in economic affairs should be minimal or non-existent. Their hands-off attitude was also due to the fact that American industrial growth in the 19th century during the Gilded Age was in a laissez-faire capitalist environment. Also, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which was a key economic piece of literature at that time, describes laissez-faire as an invisible hand that would give the maximum good for all if businessmen were allowed to pursue any venture that they deemed profitable. So, because of this attitude toward business, created pools, the collusion or joining of two companies to improve profits by suppressing competition, and trust, a type of corporate combination engaged in monopolies and restraint of trade in order to suppress their competition. These kinds of practices led the government to create the Sherman Antitrust Act, which outlawed trust and any other contracts that restrained trade. Though the act was crucial in the reform of big business in the early 20th century, it was rarely enforced. In fact, it had the opposite effect. In the 1870s, owners of large businesses used the Antitrust Act to force workers to stop, by law, striking. Their claim was that the strikes restrained trade. All in all, the big business era created new investment strategies and contributed to the view of the United States by the outside world. Great generosity and consumption gave America its image of being a land of prosperity, and its failures gave birth to modern-day Keynesian economics.